It is imperative to uphold the red line of fresh conflict between Palestine and Israel has resulted in appalling civilian casualties. The fresh conflict between Palestine and Israel seems so pale and powerless, and the frequent indiscriminate attacks seem so pale. The Security Council must resolutely defend the rule of law at international level. The Security Council must resolutely condemn all violence and the rule of law at international level, and unequivocally condemn all violence and violation of international law, and unequivocally oppose any acts in violation of international diplomatic efforts for the immediate release of diplomatic hostages. At the same time, it should be pointed out that of indiscriminate hostages and use of force. At the same time, it should be pointed out that civilian facilities such as hospitals and schools and use of force and should never become targets. Civilian facilities such as hospitals and schools are not UN staff and should never become targets in military operations. The safety of UN staff as well as humanitarian and thorough investigation into the attack on our Akli hospital in Gaza. For a thorough investigation into the attack. We oppose our Akli hospital in Gaza displacement and relocation of Gazans. We oppose the forced and urge Israel to fulfill its obligations under international humanitarian law, urge Israel and to immediately rescind its obligations under international humanitarian law in Gaza, and immediately rescind the emergency evacuation order for northern Gaza and justice. The root cause of the Palestinian Israeli conflict fairness and lies in the prolonged illegal occupation of Palestinian territories, lies in the prolonged illegal occupation of Palestinian territories, statehood, the long-running neglect of the Palestinian right to independent statehood, as well as the lack of effective protection of the Palestinian people's basic rights. The fundamental approach in addressing the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is to implement the two-state solution and to achieve peaceful coexistence between Palestine and Israel. Discussions on specific issues must not be taken out of this context, and the actions taken by the Security Council must not deviate from the right direction. Failing that, there will be no justice in the world, and decisions made by the Security Council may even be counterproductive. Mr. President, China has been working tirelessly to promote a cessation of hostilities and the restoration of peace. China has maintained close communication with all relevant parties and is committed to playing a responsible and constructive role in achieving a ceasefire, protecting civilians, and avoiding an even deadlier humanitarian disaster. China has no self-interest on the Palestinian question. Any initiative that contributes to peace will receive China's staunch support. Any endeavor that facilitates Palestinian-Israeli reconciliation will be pursued by China with all-out efforts. We will continue to stand on the side of international fairness and justice, on the side of international law, and on the side of the legitimate aspirations of the wider Arab and Islamic world. We stay committed to working with the international community and making unremitting efforts for achieving a comprehensive, just, and lasting solution to the Palestinian question at an early date. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the permanent representative of China for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Japan.
I thank Secretary General Guterres, Special Coordinator To Wensland, and Deputy Special Coordinator Hastings for their briefings. The situation is changing dramatically by the hour, and timely updates to the Security Council are critical. Mr. President, Japan once again condemns the terror attacks committed by Hamas and other Palestinian militants in the strongest terms. Hostages must be released immediately. The international community should never tolerate such heinous acts. It is important for us to redouble our diplomatic efforts so that the situation calms down and does not spill over across the region. Israel has a right to defend itself and its people in accordance with international law. At the same time, all parties need to act based on international law. Equally crucial is addressing the humanitarian situation in Gaza. We must also secure the safety of civilians. We need to take all measures necessary to allow full, rapid, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access consistent with international humanitarian law to alleviate the devastating humanitarian situation where basic needs such as electricity, water, food, and sanitation are running out. Japan would also like to reaffirm the importance of ensuring the protection of medical and humanitarian personnel exclusively engaged in medical duties in accordance with the relevant Security Council resolutions, including Resolution 2286. Mr. President, the threat of spillover into the region and beyond is very real. We have already seen skirmishes between Israel and Hezbollah, missiles and drones being shot down by the US Navy in the Red Sea, and bombing of Aleppo and Damascus airports. All too easily, the situation could erupt into a regional war that no one would benefit from. We must act now to prevent it. Japan supports any diplomatic activities that can lead towards de-escalation and the improvement of the humanitarian situation, including the Cairo Summit for Peace over the weekend and ongoing negotiations to free the hostages. We pay deep respect to the efforts by the United States, Egypt, and the Secretary General that led to the entry of aid trucks through the Rafah crossing into Gaza. But more is needed, and we should encourage further steps to continue to deliver life-saving assistance to the Palestinian people in Gaza without delay. The united action of the Security Council, which has primary responsibility for international peace and security, is needed, now more than ever. The silence of the Security Council is not acceptable, and we must move forward promptly. Mr. President, the current conflict has demonstrated yet again how vital the two-state solution is. Japan supports a two-state solution whereby Israel and future independent Palestinian state live side by side in peace and security. We must not give up on peace. Israeli and Palestinians alike deserve to live in peace, security, and dignity. In concluding, let me make 3 points. First, we need fairness. We need to express sympathy, condolences, solidarity with, and feel pains as ours with all innocent civilians, regardless of their nationality, ethnicity, or religious beliefs. Rule of law has to apply equally. Second, we need to be clear about our objectives. It's two-state solution through diplomatic efforts. Third and last, we need pragmatism. However ideal a proposal may be, it does not help if it is not very unfortunately implemented. We need to capitalize on proposals that make difference on the ground. This Council's task is to agree upon the most meaningful implementable steps we can hope for, and not to scrap proposals just because they are not ideal. It goes without saying that pragmatism should not compromise international law or international humanitarian law. What we need now is to help innocent lives, not political games. I thank you.
I thank the permanent representative of Japan for his statement, and I now call the representative of Ghana.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me begin by thanking the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, for his remarks. I'm also grateful to Special Coordinator, Mr. Tor Winnisland, and Deputy Special Coordinator for OCHA, Ms. Lynn Hastings, for their in-depth briefings. The events on the ground are indeed sobering. We take note of the measures being taken to ensure de-escalation of the hostilities and allow for diplomatic and mediation efforts to address the ongoing war as well as the dire humanitarian situation. We are meeting this afternoon or this morning on a day that is celebrated globally as UN Day, 78 years since the founding of this organization. Ordinarily, it is a day to reflect on the need for the promotion of global unity and the centrality of the UN Charter. But the ongoing hostilities and the ensuing humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip cast a shadow on this auspicious day. It is also regrettable that the Council has not as yet been successful at reaching consensus on a comprehensive humanitarian response since 7th October. While we welcome the opening of the Rafah crossing border between Egypt and Gaza to allow a convoy of 54 trucks containing much-needed humanitarian aid to enter Gaza, we are aware that a lot more needs to be done to meet the needs of the over 2 million people in Gaza. Mr. President, following the 7th October attacks launched by Hamas in southern Israel and the abduction of Israeli citizens and nationals of other countries, the government of Ghana condemned the actions of Hamas and called on the group to cease its attacks and release the hostages without condition. We are very much concerned by the continuing holding of the hostages 4 of whom have been released. The reported deaths of 1,400 Israelis and 4,300 Palestinians, mostly civilians, children, and the elderly, and the destruction of about 40% of housing in Gaza since 7th October. We note that the continued hostilities, which has extended to the West Bank, Syria, and Lebanon, portends great danger for the region and for global peace and security. We are equally concerned about the destruction of public infrastructure and private properties, not only in Israel and in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, Syria, and Lebanon. According to the UN, the relentless bombardment has directly hit UNRWA facilities, such as schools, hospitals, places of worship, and shelters, and displaced about 1.1 million civilians, including around 13,000 UNRWA staff and staff of other humanitarian agencies. We mourn the loss of innocent lives and wish a speedy recovery to all those injured in the war, and hope that all the displaced people in the affected areas will find a safe place to shelter. Mr. President, while commending the personal efforts of the UN Secretary General and the United States, their governments, and the UN Emergency Relief Coordinator and staff in negotiating the opening of the Rafah border crossing, we appeal to the government of Israel to allow the delivery of more humanitarian aid and urgently needed supplies, especially fuel, which is badly needed to power health centers and water treatment plants in Gaza. We are grateful to Egypt, Qatar, the USA, and relevant countries for the release of the 4 hostages, and the International Committee for the Red Cross for facilitating the process. We call on Hamas to release all those in their custody without any preconditions. We also call on all parties to the conflict to recognize their non-negotiable legal obligations under international humanitarian law and human rights law to protect the lives of civilians wherever they are and at all times, to refrain from attacks on civilian facilities and infrastructure. We believe that this Council has an obligation to continue consultations in order to reach consensus in an expedited manner on a resolution that addresses the immediate crisis that is ongoing in the region, including the dire humanitarian situation facing millions. Mr. President, in concluding, Ghana reaffirms her belief that the path to lasting peace and stability in the Middle East runs through the 2-state solution, with Israel and Palestine living side by side within secure and recognized borders on the basis of the negotiated 1967 borders. We urge all stakeholders, especially political leaders on both sides, to refrain from inflammatory actions and rhetoric and pursue confidence-building measures and strengthen mutual trust in order to address outstanding issues through direct dialogue. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Ghana for her speech, for her statement, and I now give the floor to the permanent representative of Mozambique.
Mr. President, Mozambique wishes to thank Brazil's presidency of the Council for convening this important meeting. We praise Brazil's leadership and the way it has been conducting our work, particularly since the eruption of the conflict on the 7th of October. On this day, 24th of October, the United Nations Day, we wish to express our gratitude to the Secretary General and through him to the workers of the United Nations for their dedication to our organization. The Secretary General's trip to the Middle East a few days ago bears testimony to his courage and integrity in the face of a difficult crisis that the world has been facing. We thank the briefers, Mr. Tor Wennesland, UN Special Coordinator of the Middle East Peace Process, and Ms. Lynn Hastings, Deputy Special Coordinator, the Resident Humanitarian Coordinator for the occupied Palestinian territory, for their insights and update on the current situation in the region. Mr. President, the situation in the Gaza Strip has been a source of grave concern for the international community, particularly since the attacks of October 7. This is a humanitarian crisis that has been ongoing for years and claiming many innocent civilians. Mozambique associates herself with the collective efforts of this Council aimed at ensuring the protection of civilians and the respect for international human rights law and international humanitarian law. There is an urgent need to open up humanitarian access corridors to ensure that those in a dire need have access to basic supplies such as water, electricity, food, and medicine. In this regard, we reiterate our call on the parties to de-escalate the tension, stop the bloodshed, halt the attacks, and stop the human suffering in the occupied territories and Gaza Strip, and allow immediately and unconditionally access of humanitarian assistance to the desperate citizens in absolute need. With the humanitarian tragedy in Gaza unfolding before our eyes, we call on the international community to ensure respect for principles and rules of international human rights, international humanitarian law, Geneva Conventions, and their protocols. We reiterate the importance and our collective duty of protecting civilians and civilian infrastructures, always, everywhere, and at all times. Mr. President, as Security Council members, it is our duty and responsibility to work together in a united manner and with a unified voice to contain and solve the conflict, to bring to an end the cycle of violence and prevent regional escalation. We hold the view that peace is always possible if dialogue between the parties prevails based on justice, observance of the principles of self-determination, and mutual recognition. We wish to remind once again that the Charter compels the parties and indeed the entire international community to practice tolerance and live together in peace with one another as good neighbors. Mr. President, we urge the parties to pursue the path of dialogue, working together in a constructive manner for a lasting peace, respecting the principle of the two-state solution in accordance with the relevant Security Council resolutions. I thank you.
I thank the permanent representative of Mozambique for his statement. There is still a number of speakers remaining on my list for this meeting. I intend, with the concurrence of members of the Council, to suspend the meeting until 3 p.m. The meeting is suspended.